New Zealand has a legacy of deadly disasters.
The whole party seemed to fall at once.
Praying to God because I wanted to survive.
Scary. Really scary.
Disasters that shaped this country.
Where I'm standing is where my grandfather got involved in the battle with the Turks.
2 yachts were lost forever.
The worst motoring accident in New Zealand history.
7 well-known New Zealanders retrace our darkest days, bringing history alive. Through the eyes of descendants.
It stayed with me. Probably always will.
It was something that we will never, ever forget, all of us.
On the 28th of December 1950, the passenger launch Ranui left Tauranga Harbour just after 7 a.m. With over 20 people on board, its destination was Mare Island, 35 kilometres off the coast.
Coming through the channel here that morning, the conditions were miserable. Rain, wind, and poor visibility. And as the Ranui hit the open ocean, the swell started to build.
The passage was rough, and the return journey was even worse. Battling breaking waves, the Ranui approached the treacherous harbour entrance. But just before 6 p.m, a siren rang through Mount Maunganui. The Ranui had capsized near the base of the mount. Volunteers raced to help the men and women now at the mercy of the vicious sea. But faced with jagged rocks and pounding swells, it was feared many lives would be lost.
I've been boating all my life. I've crossed harbour entrances like this one up and down the length of the country. I know how dangerous they can be, and I know how quickly conditions can change. 22 people lost their lives when the Ranui went down, leaving families heartbroken and a community shattered. So how did a routine daylight crossing across a relatively short stretch of water turn into one of New Zealand's worst modern-day maritime disasters?
In 1950, Mount Maunganui was already a vibrant holiday town. The sleepy winter community was overrun in summer as people flocked to the beach and local camping grounds. Many holidaymakers went out to Mare Island to fish or to camp, and a trip was planned for December the 28th on the newly launched Ranui. Just 3 weeks in the water, she was set to depart from Tauranga at 7 a.m. Waiting there that morning were a party of camping mates.
It's certainly a very different day today from the one that we went out on the Ranui.
Was it?
It was a wet, windy, nasty morning.
Not an auspicious start to your camping holiday on Mare Island.
No, it wasn't.
No.
Alan and his brother Jim had carefully planned the trip, and along with Lynn and the rest of their camping party, they weren't to be put off by the weather. Today, the Ranui's sister ship, the Ratahi, is retracing the start of their fateful journey.
Does that look familiar?
Very much so. Yes, she's very much the same.
Yeah.
Really brings back memories of that trip out there.
Yes.
The Ranui crossed the harbour to pick up the rest of the passengers at the mount. The day didn't look any good for fishing, but a number of game people got on, including a group of young women. With a commitment to drop Alan and the other campers off, the Ranui hit the open sea.
There was very, very little visibility. It was windy. It was a broken sea. It was a very unpleasant trip out. There's no doubt about that. For someone that wasn't used to the sea, it would have been fairly trying, very taxing, I think.
There were 4 girls that were really not very happy at all, and they'd been all sick, and they were sitting in the stern on the deck trying to keep themselves happy there, but it was pretty tough for them.
We didn't see anything of the island at all until we were really close, and Jeff Hunt, the skipper, did a magnificent job of navigating us out there. He took us into Southeast Bay, and conditions there were not too bad. He was able to put the boat's nose onto the beach, push it on, and embark all our gear.
As they watched the Ranui depart, little did the campers know that in just a few hours, tragedy would strike. On the return journey, many passengers sheltered inside to escape the worsening weather. Rolling waves were now breaking across the harbour entrance. Just before 5:30 p.m, skipper Geoffrey Hahn had called marine radio in Tauranga. He was going to attempt the treacherous crossing. On the mainland, many holidaymakers had gone to Mount Maunganui's blowhole to watch it perform in the bad weather.
But at the same time, coming in from Mere Island was the Ranui, through big seas. And there was a group standing here watching out towards North Rock, where that yacht is now. And the sea was huge and confused. And as the Ranui went through there, it looked like it was in trouble.
Walking round the mount at that very moment were 15-year-old Ray Bushell and his brother Bob.
It was very squally, rain and very big waves, probably 6 metres. We got to around about here and glanced out there and saw this boat.
How far off?
Well, not very far.
This is North Rock here. So this is quite close, isn't it?
That's very close.
Just 100 metres offshore, the Ranui was battling huge swells.
There was a rogue wave, well, I call it a rogue wave, that came in at a different angle, and that lifted the back of the boat. We saw it roll, and the rocks were just there.
The boys ran to the ocean beach to raise the alarm, along with other witnesses. The Ranui's crew and passengers were now in the ferocious sea, being forced onto the rocky shore. Rescuers rushed to help, but as Ray and Bob ran back around the mount, they were stopped in their tracks.
Bob happened to glance out. Look, look, he says. There was this girl sitting on a rock, waving her hand, just like that. She wasn't far offshore. We glanced again and she was gone.
As Ray and his brother continued to where the boat had rolled, a grim scene awaited them.
We came around to about here, and there were bodies up on the bank. They were putting them on the stretchers, and without hesitation, we just picked up one of them and took it off, and came back on around again to see what else we could do.
Ray and his brother carried 2 bodies back around the track, as dozens of others risked their lives to get to the men and women in the water. Back in town, news of the tragedy was starting to spread. Cora Carter was 13 years old when her father Harry and brother Philip Smith joined the Ranui as crew on that fateful voyage.
It was a dull day. I decided to go down to the pool, and it was getting towards 5-ish or whatever, and I thought, oh, Dad should be coming back in round about now. And I hopped on my bike and I banged into a friend of mine. And she just said, oh, Cora, she said, there's been a terrible, terrible accident. She said, one of the boats have capsized and all lost, all drowned. I just took off on my bike and rode all the way home, calling out to Mum as I was going through the door.
Mum, is Dad home?
I saw her sitting at the sewing machine, real white-faced, and then I saw these people sitting on the couch, and I realised that they must have come to tell her. Because I bawled my eyes out, of course, screaming around the place, but...
So at that point, you thought you'd lost both your dad and your brother?
Yes, yes. I think we were both in shock. I would have been in shock.
As the ocean continued to rage, families waited, desperate for news. Rescuers worked tirelessly, with many getting gashed and wounded on the brutal rocks. And in the vicious conditions, could there be any survivors? Rescuers swarmed to help, but one group would prove vital in the conditions: the young men of the Mount Maunganui Surf Lifesaving Club.
I just knocked off work and was out on the footpath. The surf club siren was rung, and we heard it up the town and came tilting down as fast as we could.
24-year-old butcher Jim Wells and the other lifeguards were all volunteers, and gathering a crew, they raced to the scene.
There was a big swell breaking on the rocks. I didn't actually see the wreck because it was sort of probably upside down. Bodies were coming up with the swells onto the rock. The first one we went down to get, we only just got a hold of him and looked up, and there was a wall of water coming over the top of us, and it just landed on top, and it just flattened you on the rock. You couldn't do a thing, couldn't move. It was scary, really scary.
Despite losing one man to the sea, Jim and his crew soon pulled in another victim.
Took him up onto the track and we started to CPR on him.
1, 2, 3, 4.
But the doctor, he came along and said, it's useless. He said, they're drowned. Been drowned, all drowned. Because there was no sign of anybody alive. Like there was no show of swimming out and rescuing anybody. No, it was pretty gory.
By midnight, over a dozen bodies had been recovered and taken to the surf club and St John's huts, which were now a temporary morgue. The boat itself was reduced to matchwood. On board the Ranui were Cora's father, Harry, and brother, Philip Smith. That night, she and her mother gathered at a friend's house, numb with shock, fearing there were no survivors.
I think we were just sort of sheltered by everybody that evening, you know, and everybody trying to keep our spirits up and hope. And it was towards midnight, I think, and we were ushered to the door and we could see Phil. And you could see sort of glistening water sort of from his curly hair just sort of shining in the... And yeah, and it was... We give him the biggest hug. But Mum, you know, Mum was absolutely overjoyed. It was mostly mother and son, just... Yeah, at least you've got one. At least one's here.
Philip had been in the wheelhouse when the Ranui was capsized by the huge wave and fought his way free. Incredibly, he was then picked up in the swell and dropped onto a tiny patch of sand. His life had been saved. But in the chaos, Philip lost sight of his father.
We're still hoping for Dad, but as well, because it was a vague time. I mean, there was a lot of conflicting stories about who was, you know, who was pulled out of the water and who wasn't.
But the next day, the news came that they'd been dreading. Cora's father's body had been found. His death had a devastating impact on the family.
One kid at school, he said, I'll never forget that when that accident happened at the Ranui. He said, one day you were this vivacious teenager, the next day the sun's gone right out of you. You come to school and you're a totally different girl.
Cora's mother became very ill, so Cora was sent to live in Auckland, and the family was torn apart. For Cora's 19-year-old brother Philip, who survived the tragedy, that day would have a profound effect.
He became a man, you know, like overnight, quite morose, solemn, bit of a drinker. I think he felt very guilty, you know, that he was saved and his father wasn't. He felt he wasn't worthy.
Philip would struggle to settle for the rest of his life, but he never lost his love of the ocean till he died, aged 80.
That's a good photo.
Yeah. We had that sitting in front of the coffin when he died, because it was just exactly for contemplating life. A little bit of a whimsical look on his face. What am I doing here? Just typically him.
I'd heard about survivor's guilt before, but I had never seen it before. It seems so unfair to have survived something like that, a tragedy like that, and then to feel so sad about it for the rest of your life, for it to change your mood or your mindset. Seems such a slap in the face.
In the days after the Ranui capsized, the full horror of the tragedy unfolded. One man's body was wedged in the rocks for days, and his devastated father sat with him until his son was freed. More badly injured bodies began to wash up along the ocean beach.
People used to keep up a vigil down there. If they saw anything, they'd ring the siren and we'd come down again.
Jim was on patrol a few days after the wreck when something was spotted in the water.
Two of us shot in the water, and sure enough, it was coming along the bottom body. So we grabbed it and pulled it in. But unfortunately, it was the husband of one of the women that was watching. You know, and that was a devastating event.
After the Ranui went down that day, what effect did it have on you and on the other members of the Surf Life Saving Club?
A devastating effect, really, because we hadn't had anything like that ever before. That was a really real disaster. And to lose that many people, you know, it was a terrible time.
On board the Ranui on December the 28th were over 20 men and women. Many of the missing were holidaymakers, including 24-year-old Gunter. His nephew Ben has come to Mount Maunganui, where his uncle was camping 65 years ago.
Gunter, from what I know, was always active. Everybody else wanted to stay in the campsite and lie down, but Gunter wanted to get out there and enjoy it.
Gunter was determined to celebrate life. He and his immediate family fled Nazi Germany in 1938. The rest of the family were killed in the Holocaust, but the Ungers had fought to build a new life for themselves in Hamilton.
He was very literary. He loved classical music. He was a good-looking young man enjoying the fruits of life and did the normal things that Kiwis do. Met a girl, fell in love, got engaged, and came to Tauranga with my parents for the summer holidays of 1950. Mum and Dad were sleeping in this van, and the rest were in the tent off to the side, so a classic Kiwi holiday.
The morning of December the 28th dawned, and with no one else keen for a boat trip, Gunter left for the Ranui on his own.
My mother and father stayed at the campsite. The storm came in later that day, and no one told them what was happening, so they went down to the wharf site to wait.
But later that evening, word spread through the town that the Ranui had been wrecked.
Gunter was a very good swimmer, apparently, and my father always hoped that he would somehow miraculously survive when they found out about the accident. But the next day, my father was contacted to identify the body. He couldn't identify the body because it was so damaged, but he could recognise what Gunter had been wearing. Yeah, it must have been difficult to have to identify your only brother. My understanding is telling my grandparents was one of the hardest things. Gunter was obviously the oldest, and they had huge expectations for him. So losing him unnecessarily after working so hard to make a life for your family must have just been devastating. Every year they lit a candle at the anniversary of Gunter's death, which they burnt until the anniversary of his birth, which was about a week later. I remember it as a child. It was an awkward time of year as they quietly and silently remembered him and the lost opportunity.
So sitting here now in Mount Maunganui, where your uncle spent his last days, How do you feel now about being here at this time?
I think the main thing I feel about it all is just sad to die somewhat meaninglessly after such a lucky survival from the horrors of World War II. It's just sad. And I think it's important to retell these stories so that people like Gunter aren't forgotten, and in our own ways just make sure that we live fruitful lives on their behalf as well as our own.
Four days after the Ranui was wrecked, there were still 3 people missing, including 19-year-old Margaret Goodyear. Peter Goodyear was 22 when his younger sister left their home in Gisborne to go on holiday to Mount Maunganui.
Were you and Margaret close? Yeah, very close, yeah. Good pals. She was my only sister, only 2 of us children in the family. Margaret was a very bubbly girl, and she got on so well with her mother and her father too, of course. He called her Topsy. But these 2 would giggle and giggle. Margaret was a typist at the Chief Postmaster's office in Gisborne. And she was also a dancer, quite a very good dancer since the age of about 5.
Did you go to all the shows?
Saw a lot of them, yes. Know a lot of the music that was played for their dances. Gets in your head and you can't forget it.
Margaret and 2 of her best friends, Margaret Hands and Patsy Burke, had big plans for that summer.
I was there Christmas 1950. These girls were getting ready to go on a holiday up at Mount Maunganui. All excitement, had their accommodation booked, and the 3 girls were in the lounge painting their fingernails and toenails bright colours and laughing. And probably that was the last time I saw them. Must have been very soon afterwards. I was at the big army hall in Gisborne. We were organising a dance. The man who looked after the army hall came up to me and he said, "Just had a phone call. It seems you better go home quick. If your folks need you, your mother and father need you." And I got home and found there was disarray there. My poor mother was beside herself and Dad was looking after her, and no one seemed to know what had happened except there was talk of a boat and the girls being in the water.
With Peter's father looking after his devastated mother, Peter was sent to Tauranga. Patsy had already been identified, but it was up to Peter to identify Margaret Hands and his sister when she was found almost a week later.
Was it hard, identifying the girls?
It was, yes. Yeah. Very. I remember the nail polish on their toes and their fingers that they'd put on there on Boxing Day or Christmas Day. No, it wasn't easy at all. Of course, when that was completed, we had 3 funerals in Gisborne to go to. Me and Mum and Dad. I've never seen anything so sad, and it was my poor mother. She was in a terrible state, really, because her and Margaret, her daughter, her lovely daughter, were such great friends with all the dancing and all the fun. And there it was.
The loss was devastating for the whole family, but Margaret would never be forgotten.
I certainly did miss my sister, but I don't know. You just carried on and lived on without her. And you knew very well you couldn't do anything about it. Just got memories, that's all.
It's extraordinary to witness the stoicism of the people who live through difficult circumstances and how they deal with tragedy, and to be allowed into their lives to watch it, and yet somehow that level of emotion is still present, and they accept it and just live with it. And when they share it with you, it's a privilege and very humbling.
As the new year dawned in 1951, there were still passengers missing from the Ranui. Ray Mead was desperate to find his friend Jack Williams, and every morning would scour the coast on Matakana Island on the other side of the harbour entrance.
We would row over from Pilot Bay each day and land here and walk the beach. Of course, we were over here looking for Jack to try and bring him home to his family.
Ray was on holiday in Mount Maunganui with his wife and daughter. He'd caught a ride down on the back of a truck, which is where he'd met Jack.
We became quite good friends in 2 hours on that truck, yeah. And that's when he invited me to join him on this fishing trip.
But in a twist of fate, Ray never made it onto the Ranui.
It was a very stormy day, and as I understand it, his wife was very unhappy about him going. They'd only been married 6 weeks. By the time they finished their debate about it, he ran out of time to pick me up, fortunately. And so he made a late run and dashed down and got on the boat.
When the news hit that the Ranui had been wrecked, Ray was determined to find Jack. Having been asked by the Williams family to identify him, Ray and a friend started searching.
We used to hire a dinghy every day. We figured that the tide run would take them down to Matakana. We rowed across, pulled the boat above high water mark. We went quite a way along the beach, and then we could see some object on the beach. We got closer, and then we could see that it was a person.
Ray and his friend had just found Peter Goodyear's sister, Margaret.
Margaret Goodyear. Yeah. She looks a very nice person.
The memories are obviously still pretty fresh, right?
Making sure Margaret was safely returned to her family, Ray kept searching for Jack. There was no sign of his friend, but 2 days later he came across another body, missing father of 4, Jock Norman.
He was a very big man, a very strong man, so people like him, if they couldn't survive, well, it just wasn't survivable. I love the sea, but it can be a very bad enemy.
With Jock Norman found, that left just one man missing, Ray's friend, Jack Williams.
Some days later, my friend was found floating in the water out the back of Rabbit Island. So I did the identification of him then. His in-laws honoured me by making me a pallbearer.
"22 lives were lost when the Ranui went down. 4 families lost more than one member. Brothers lost together and sons with their fathers. Many were angry. Why had the Ranui gone out in such bad weather? Why had it come in if it was so rough? With so many dead, the community demanded answers, and a court of inquiry was held 2 months later. John McGill skippered the Ranui's sister ship, the Ratahi, for many years, and has made the same voyage to Mare Island hundreds of times. He knows this type of boat intimately, and I'm keen to hear his take on what might have happened that day.
I've got no doubt about the seaworthiness of the boat itself. It would have been a very, very, very good, well-built boat. And well-designed and fit for the purpose that it was built for, yes. You probably couldn't have got much better.
Much of the inquiry focused on the decisions made by skipper Geoffrey Harnett. As a father of 6 children, he wasn't taking anything lightly, with as much to lose as anyone.
So Geoffrey was coming along here beside the mount, right in close, on this 1950s chart, which is really shallow. Why would he do that?
That would have been the calmest water that he could see from out at sea. Since the mid-50s, the entrance has changed because of the dredging. The wide expanse of water across there was only 20 feet. It made it so that the waves used to break in the form of breakers. They break because the water was shallow, and it's boosted by the tide running out.
According to the inquiry, Harnett came in on the incoming tide, which should have made it safer and conditions at the entrance had improved. But John believes other factors were at play.
He must have come right in on the bottom of the tide. The flow of the water still goes out for probably another hour.
There may have been an undercurrent of tide still running out.
Yes. Yes, undercurrent, an undertow, just like you get an undertow on the ocean beach.
And that would have caused wind against tide and made that big wave stand up.
Yes, that's right, yes.
So on that day, the wave that came in and struck the beam ends, there wasn't anything that Geoffrey Harnett could have done.
No, I don't think so. It was just unfortunately that wave peaked up and possibly broke at that particular time. And the boat would just pick up on it and it would have fallen off the top of the crest of the wave and fallen over the front of it and then rolled over.
Everyone questioned in the inquiry who knew him stated Geoffrey was a capable, professional skipper. And almost all the local seamen questioned said they too would have come in those conditions.
It would have been a very big call to have turned around and gone back to Mare Island or even gone to Motiri. The easiest way out was to come in the harbour. He made the best call and he was qualified to make that call.
The Court of Inquiry found that the launch was seaworthy, the skipper competent, and all decisions justified. The cause was found to be a large wave that picked up the boat by its stern quarter and rolled it. It was simply an accident.
When I started this journey, I had qualms about Geoffrey's decision to come in. I thought he probably should have waited, stood off. But after reading the report and listening to you, it's pretty clear that he actually made the right decision.
Yes, I would say so. It was just ill-fated. But they tried to think of all the precautions they can take afterwards. And it's too late after it's gone. So it's just one of those things. There's nobody to blame.
The response to the inquiry was mixed. Many still felt angry that their loved ones had met such a brutal end. The skipper, Geoffrey Harnett's family, could find some solace that no official blame would be laid at their door. But for his widow and 6 children left behind, the disaster would set off a terrible chain of events. Harnett's daughter, Nairi, was just 9 when he took the wheel that day.
Oh, well, this is my mum and dad. Look at his beautiful hair. He's quite handsome. And this is my brothers and sisters. He was always my hero, but it's only what you build up in your mind. I mean, he was tall and he was handsome and not there very often to growl at us.
With their dad often away at sea, Nairi and her siblings spent a lot of time with their grandparents. Grandad Jerry Williams was the owner of the Ranui and ran Harbour Transport.
We spent most of our childhood out on the boats or down at the wharf because my grandmother worked in the office. So we used to always go down to the wharf to see them. They were really, really good to us. They were the stable part of our lives.
In the Christmas of 1950, Nairi and her 5 siblings had been sent to stay with different parts of the family for the holidays.
I was staying with my Uncle Ken, they got a phone call early in the morning. Very hush, hush, hush.
The adults then mysteriously disappeared, and 2 days later, Nairi was pulled aside.
My uncle said to me, "Come and help me pick some peas." So I went out there and he said, "I've got some bad news to tell you. Your dad drowned." Life just changed. Life changed after that.
The loss of their father would exact a terrible toll on the young children.
I'm not quite sure how long after that, but we all got packed up and we went away. I'm sure an orphanage was never mentioned. We went on a train to Wellington and then we were put in a home at Masterton, Watman Home, 4 of us. And I don't remember my mother staying while we settled in or anything like that.
So was anything explained to you?
No.
You were just supposed to figure it out.
I suppose. The younger ones were in a different dormitory.
Stop it.
I was always responsible for Barry, because he was only 2. And when he wet the bed, I was always told, you know, as if it was my fault. I mean, you can't blame him wetting his bed when he's in the dormitory with people he doesn't know.
With 4 siblings at the orphanage, their oldest sister Myrna stayed with their grandparents. Their remaining sister Glenys was taken by welfare and adopted out permanently. Nairi and her younger siblings had no idea what lay in store for them.
We were there probably 6 months to a year. Mum went to Wellington when we were at the home. She was working in Wellington. She used to come and visit occasionally. She came this time and she bought me a walkie-talkie doll. And she said, "I thought I should come and tell you I've just got married." And that's when we were allowed to go home.
So your relationship with your mum must have taken a bit of a tumble.
Well, I mean, as little kids, what do you think? I was lucky I had a walkie-talkie doll, but from then on I thought that was a bribe.
Yeah.
Really, yeah.
Why would she marry so quickly, do you think? She was a woman who needed companionship, or?
I would say so. She just didn't cope afterwards.
Grief.
It was too big a deal to take all us kids home and be responsible. It was hard going back to school because I wasn't like everyone else. Well, we were strangers, weren't we? Really. We were different. But I've never made friends easy. I still feel it hard to mix with people.
Unhappy at home and school, Nairi would take refuge at her grandparents', but the accident had taken a huge toll.
It was terrible for them. Well, I know that Granddad got sugar diabetes after that and was on insulin every day from the shock of it. They were beside themselves, really.
Even though the magisterial inquiry cleared your dad from any wrongdoing, your grandfather still felt responsible about what happened.
Of course he did.
And that must have been tough as hell.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it changed everybody's life.
Despite her sister Glenys being adopted out of the family at 8, Nairi has remained close to her throughout their lives. I'm meeting them at the memorial to the Ranui, the site of the tragedy that caused such a terrible split in their family. Glenys has spent her life questioning why she was given away, and the memories are still raw.
My grandmother, I was staying with her and she gave me a bath and she said to me, now remember that whatever happens to you from now, your mother is doing her best for you.
The next day, 8-year-old Glenys was sent to school in her best clothes.
I can see myself at the school, and I was actually playing outside when they came and got me. And I didn't know the people. It wasn't Mum, it wasn't.
They're going to be terrible.
I didn't know them.
Kidnapped.
And I was gone.
Welfare officers took Glenys from school that day. She was adopted by another family and didn't set foot in her family home for another decade.
I don't know why I was given away. I just thought I was the only one who'd been, and I'd been so bad that I'd been taken away and given away. And it was very hard to live with.
Both Nairi and Glenys have suffered much heartache in their lives, but their relationship is a constant solace.
All I seem to have had all of my life is loss. Just loss, I lose everything. But, yes, I made it.
Nairi's always been there for you, eh?
Always.
So what does it feel like for you now, sitting here, looking out and thinking about how the day affected your life?
It looks so dreadful. How on earth could it have been that rough that it would turn a boat over? For a long time you only thought of yourself, but when you see how many different families and how many kids were in those families, it's shocking.
When the Ranui went down in 1950, it left over a dozen families devastated. And in speaking with those who lost loved ones, it's clear how deep the pain still is and the lifelong impact that terrible day had on them all. I mean, it's easy to say in hindsight that Jeffrey Harnett made a bad decision because, you know, the Ranui went down with a loss of 22 lives. But if I was the skipper that day, sobering as it may be, I suspect that I would have made the same decision and come in. And you have to remember that even though you're well-equipped, skilled, capable, and the boat's well-found, the sea can still throw up freak conditions that surprise and ultimately defeat you. I think what's important is that we pay respect to the men and women who lost their lives on the Ranui on one of the most tragic days in New Zealand's maritime history.